Yeah, I had problems this morning getting my slides all in order, so that disconcerts me a little bit. There was a question that would have relegated someone, I'm sure. All right, Hosea is very much at a similar time to Amos. It's the northern, that was the question. The question was, what is the southern kingdom of Israel called? Judah. Did you get that, Abraham? Oh, you weren't listening. See me after class. So, Hosea was a little bit later, and we don't know whether they crossed over at all. We don't know whether they had a cup of tea together by the Sea of Galilee. Probably not. So Hosea's a little bit later, and remember last week I said things were really prosperous, and the country was healthy, and they were overconfident. They suffered from hubris. I love that word. My daughter-in-law taught that to me. I think she said, David, you're a bit hubris. Some of you who know me will probably agree with that. It was this period of great instability. There were 5 different kings within 10 years, and 3 of them got to the throne by killing the other king. So there was a lot of anarchy, political anarchy. And here's a quote from dear John Bright, an historian who I rely on a lot. There was no integrity, there was no principle, there was no common faith, and the Israelites turned on Israelites like so many cannibals, as if they were eating each other, exhibiting barbarity, which would have been shocking to even heathen nations. So it was chaos. Those words, integrity, principle, and common faith, we might hold on to, because when I get to my application, I'll be asking you to critique our government or governments. Because you see, the prophets were always critiquing their governments, their rulers, their leaders. I'll say a little bit more about that later. The leaders and the people had turned away from Yahweh, the one true God. Jeroboam paid a massive amount of money to the Assyrian ruler Tiglath-Pileser. Tiglath-Pileser, I love that. He was the ruler of Assyria, and they were the dominant nation at that time. He paid 1,000 talents. And a talent, I had it written down here somewhere, a talent is like, 1 talent is 34 kilograms of silver. So multiply that by 1,000 times, you do the maths. It was a lot of money. He chickened out and he paid off the Assyrians, thinking that that would give stability. But like the people in Amos's time, the Israelites were also being unfaithful in their worship. They were worshipping and mucking around with the foreign gods as well as their own. They were mixing, syncretism we called it. Hosea's message is a tragic story about his own life. His life becomes the metaphor for his message. He is commanded, called by God to marry a woman who is going to be unfaithful to him. Go and get married. Your wife will be unfaithful and your children will be just like her. In the same way my people have left me and become unfaithful to me. And poor old Hosea not only has an unfaithful wife who becomes a prostitute, he then is asked by God to buy her back. Can you imagine that? From the pimp. From the guy who owned that particular brothel. And if I go to my notes, he paid 15 pieces of silver, chapter 3, and 150 kilograms of barley to buy her back. I told her that for a long time she would have to wait for me without being a prostitute or without committing adultery, and during that time I would wait for her. And God says through Hosea, in just this way the people of Israel will have to live without me for a long time before I restore them. And you know, it had never dawned on me in all my studies of the prophets that here is a prophecy of the 700 years that Israel had to wait before the Messiah came. A long time. Unfortunately, some of them are still waiting. Surely, I think I've got another. Hosea's life told the story of Israel's unfaithfulness. And Hosea warned that calamity was going to come upon them as a result. But, and this was our reading that Catherine read so well, that reading was about the restoration. That one day God was going to forgive and restore. There it is. I will bring my people back to me. I will love them with all my heart. I will no longer be angry with them. I will be to the people of Israel like the rain in a dry land. See, because of time, I've quickly skipped through the guts of the message, but I think you get it. It's an horrific message, but it's one that lingers with us long because it's so colourful. And poor old Hosea, you've got to feel for him and what he went through and what that family went through. I believe that this prophecy of Hosea and the book of Hosea has application at 3 levels. And the first is political. You can't escape the fact that the prophets of the Old Testament addressed the leaders of the nation. And that's political activity. None of them became leaders. And we know in church history, whenever the church gets involved in ruling, then things go wrong. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and it happened to the church on numerous occasions through the centuries. That's not what the prophets are about. What they're about is critiquing the leadership in light of God's word, God's will. So that's the political. We're going to spell that out a little bit more. But they also have a message for Israel. The new Israel now, since the new covenant. And since the Messiah has come, we are the new Israel. The church, the ecclesia in the world. And therefore we have to listen to what Hosea might be saying to us. And then there is application at the personal level. And I will develop that in a few minutes. So political. Hosea's challenge to us is that we put our leadership and our political powers under the microscope of what are their values, what are their behaviours that result from their values, where are their allegiances, and what are their policies. Now, and I've said nationally and internationally. And I try and challenge our young people here, all of you really, we need to stay aware of what's happening in the world. We have a responsibility as God's people to do that. And we've got the means to do that now with the internet and with podcasts. Specifically here, Hosea is critical of his nation's unfaithfulness to God. Now, in New Zealand, Aotearoa, that's a bit problematic, isn't it? How do we apply that to our leaders? There are some parties that would have no time for God's word. in our country. This would invite much debate because we wouldn't all agree with each other, because some of us drift left, some of us are centric, and some of us drift right. But Hosea is saying, well, put it under the microscope of what you think God is saying to us. And of course that's problematic because we each interpret various passages of the Bible slightly differently. But he challenges us to fight for values that emanate from God's law. And if we were in the Old Testament, it would be the Torah and Levitical law. But we're in the New Covenant. So it's more about, and I think I had one more point here, it's more about what is the way of Christ on any particular issue. And you've heard me say this before, what would Jesus do? And that's a bit clearer for us because we have the four Gospels, and because many of us have a close relationship with God through Christ. And so it's much more healthy for us to ask that question when it comes to holding our politicians to account and our leaders. That's probably enough, maybe most of you are still awake, to stimulate you to think about what is our responsibility as God's people in terms of, and it's a pity we won't have home group on Wednesday night because this would be a beauty, wouldn't it? How about the church community? And we can think about the church on different levels as well. We can think about it internationally. A bit hard to specify. We can think about the church in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the mainstream church, the Roman Catholics, the Anglicans, the Presbyterians. To what extent is Christ the centre of our allegiance? I'm really only qualified to ask that of our own denomination, and for many of you that's a bit of a mystery. It's maybe just our eldership really that keep tabs. Some of you do as well. But how are we doing as a Presbyterian denomination in this country? Some of the parachurch groups and some of the unconventional churches are actually putting us to shame, I think, in terms of their ability to engage with the community and be clear about what Jesus is all about. To what extent is justice, mercy, and peace central to the focus and expenditure where our money goes? They're the sort of questions we need to ask as a church. To what extent does the Bible act as our touchstone? We have ministers joining our denomination who kind of choke on the words when they have to agree with the scriptures. And they have a very strange interpretation of the scriptures. So there's lots here from Hosea for us to think about. As a church here, St. Andrews, that's you. We need to keep asking those questions too. How do we exhibit justice and peace? And how centered are we on the message of Jesus Christ? Let's not get distracted on other stuff. Good questions, aren't they? Hosea calls us to reflect. And lastly, on a personal level. On a personal level. And I've plucked out this verse from chapter 2 because I reckon this sums it up in terms of what is Hosea's message to you and me. Therefore I will, this is God saying about Israel, therefore I will allure her and speak tenderly to her. What on earth? That sounds like romantic language, doesn't it? Read Song of Songs. Allure in Hebrew is pathar. comes from the root word pathar, which means to persuade to such an extent that the other person is overwhelmed by the love that is being offered. Therefore, God is saying, that's what I'll do for you when you go astray. When you turn away from me, I will allure you back. And one of the commentators has said this is unreasonable, mystical grace. God finds a reason where there should be no reason to extend forgiveness. But God does when we need Him most. And I remember my own conversion experience. There was no way I could resist the love that I felt on that occasion, even though I knew I didn't deserve it, even though I was utterly surprised by the enormity of the love. And many of you will have had that experience. Maybe some of you need to experience that. Therefore I will allure her and speak tenderly to her. The Hebrew is I will speak to her heart. And that's not just to her emotions in Hebrew. It means I will speak to your being, the very depth of who you are. That's where I will speak to you and draw you back to me. You see how if we dig a bit deeper with people like Hosea, we can see the potency of God's message for our land, for our world, but also for us individually.